Is gun ownership un-American? Before you pull out your piece, I would like to use the next 5 brief minutes to discuss if gun ownership is un-American, or if perhaps gun ownership is the most American thing there is. After all, guns have been a part of this nation's history since before the beginning. Washington had a gun, Grant had a gun, Eisenhower had a gun, and MacArthur had a gun. Of course, they were all at war, but all the same, they had guns on the frontier. They had guns in the Old West. They had guns when the railroad was being built, usually to keep the unarmed labor in line. And they had guns back when the unions were being busted. And what's more American than busting unions? Clearly, guns have been a part of American history. But so has slavery, genocide, oppression of the poorest class, waste, and greed. So who the hell am I to say that guns are un-American? For the record, I haven't said any such thing. I'm just asking questions. And so far, at least, the NRA has been unable to make inquiries a legal reason for shooting someone. That's next week's agenda. According to a recent article in the New York Times, gun ownership in the United States is at its lowest rate since my uppity liberal ass was born. Guns were owned by 50% of U.S. households in the 1970s. That figure dropped down to 43% by the 1990s. And just a decade ago, that figure was down to 35%. Considering the rate of decline, it wouldn't be too difficult to project that gun ownership has easily dropped to less than 1/3 of the nation by the time this anti-gun propaganda hits YouTube. 1/3 sounds like a significant minority. Is the United States a country run by minorities? Well, it's run by white men who hold more wealth than anyone else, but that's not the lie they teach in school, so let's just say it isn't. The United States was founded on the principle of majority rule. The majority, therefore, represents America. That would seem to suggest that gun ownership is, well, only 1/3 American. But before I get shot for doing math, let's run through some more numbers. Statistics show more guns are sold all the time. More ammunition is sold all the time too. But with gun ownership numbers dropping steadily in the last 40 years, that would seem to suggest that more and more guns are ending up in fewer and fewer hands. Those hands would include criminals and gun enthusiasts and criminals enthusiastic about guns. Ask a few gun owners how they feel about giving up their guns, and more of them will respond, let's say, negatively. Heck, I tweeted a suggestion that guns might be dangerous, and within hours I was compared to Hitler. This seems to suggest an increasingly volatile minority arming themselves to the teeth. Why? Some gun nuts, enthusiasts, will quote you the Second Amendment, the one about a well-regulated militia, as justification for owning as much firepower as they want. And why would they need to do that? To protect themselves from wild animals? To protect themselves from crime? Or is it to protect themselves from the government that gives them the right they declare is so essential to protect them from the government that gives them the right to... I'm getting a headache. Seriously, what is so terrifying that a person would need to own a weapon manufactured solely for the purpose of taking a life? Why are people so fearful that they put themselves in danger by bringing a killing machine into their homes? Is fear American? Is terror American? Is it American to shop for the same collectibles owned by criminals and mass murderers? Maybe it is. Maybe we live in a country where we are on the verge of killing each other because we don't want our right to kill each other taken away from us. Maybe we're just a bunch of irrational, inhumane brutes. I'm sure the comments below will reflect plenty of that. But I recall another time in our nation's history when we killed each other because we so desperately wanted to act in an inhumane manner. That was called the Civil War. And the United States was divided then, too. In the North, 22 million people stood against the inhumanity of slavery. In the South, 9 million people stood for the inhumanity of slavery. That put the Confederacy at more than 1/3 of the U.S. population at the outbreak of the Civil War. And yet, reasonable people, reasonable Americans, were able to stop that inhumanity. What about guns?